Welcome back to the Crypto channel, everyone. My name is Josh, and right now the US stock market is having a massive bounce in the short term because Donald Trump just officially flipped on tariffs, at least in the short term, which I'll talk about in just a moment, while the price of Bitcoin is now starting to play out this new bullish divergence and also breaking out from this price pattern that we need to pay attention to, while the price of Solana is also now starting to play out this price pattern, while the price of XRP is now bouncing from this critical line of support. So I'll be talking about all of that and more later in the video, so definitely watch to the end. First of all, just before we take a look at the Bitcoin and crypto charts today, and before even taking a look at the US stock market today, we need to talk about the news today, because just a matter of hours ago, Donald Trump just officially flipped on tariffs, at least temporarily. Because as we can see here from a tweet from the White House basically sharing Donald Trump's post from Truth Social, we can see that Donald Trump basically increased the tariff rate on China up to 125%, but at the same time also putting a 90-day pause on pretty much all of the other tariffs for the other countries out there, and actually lowering those tariffs down to 10%. And that is definitely the big news in all of this. That's what everyone was waiting for in the stock market, in the crypto market, to potentially see some sort of bounce or possible reversal, because obviously there's no denying that one of the main reasons as to why we've seen all of this bearish price action recently in stocks and crypto is mainly due to the tariffs obviously coming out of the United States. And obviously, anytime there's uncertainty in the market, basically the market sells off because uncertainty equals risk. And so a lot of people were uncertain on how long these tariffs might last for, if they might be permanent or they might be temporary just to negotiate. But what it seems like right now, other than the China tariffs, once again, pretty much all of these tariffs put on pause and lowered to 10%, this is showing that they are potentially just negotiating, and it's basically used as a negotiating tool rather than perhaps as a permanent measure. And so this is very good news for markets. This is very bullish for markets, because obviously, once again, tariffs are very bearish for markets, at least in the short term. So if these tariffs were to remain permanent, that would have been very bad news, not just for the countries getting tariffed, but for the United States economy and for the overall markets. And so basically, the moment this statement came out showing that Donald Trump is placing a 90-day pause on the tariffs, lowering some of these tariffs here, well, most of the tariffs other than China, basically the market rallied in the short term. That announcement came out right around here, and we saw a massive bounce, one of the biggest bounces in history in a single trading day for the US stock market, after we recently saw some of the worst days in recent history in the stock market just last week. And if you're wondering why I'm talking about the stock market on a crypto channel, it's because stocks and crypto are highly correlated. It's not a perfect correlation, but usually if we see a major dump in the stock market, we're also going to see some bearish price action for Bitcoin and crypto, and vice versa. If we see a decent bounce in the short term for the stock market, usually that's going to be bullish for Bitcoin and crypto, most likely resulting in a bounce. And if we're zooming out on the US stock market, but taking a look at the NASDAQ 100 index, because this is the S&P 500 index right here on the daily time frame, this is the NASDAQ 100 index on the weekly time frame, and obviously, as I already said a couple of days ago now on the channel, we officially confirmed an oversold signal for the first time since May 2022 on the weekly RSI for the NASDAQ 100 index. And so obviously, as I've been saying for the last couple of days, you can even go back and watch my last few videos here on the channel, when the price of the stock market was all the way at this exact low down here, I was saying expect a short-term relief in the next few days or weeks, expect some sort of bounce potentially over the next few weeks, and that is now perfectly playing out as expected. And so perhaps it's just a coincidence that this flip on tariffs happened at the same time as this oversold signal, but either way, obviously, if you took some action with maybe taking a bit of profits from short positions or buying stocks based on this oversold signal for a short-term rally, either way, obviously, you would have done very well with this decent bounce, at least so far. But as I've also said over the last few days, even though I now expect a short-term relief, a bit of a bounce in the short term, once again, now perfectly playing out, this is not necessarily confirming the end of all of this bearish price action here, the end of the bear market, because technically speaking, speaking, in the stock market right here, we did actually hit bear market territories. For the Nasdaq 100 index, we were down around 25% from high to low, and the technical definition for a bear market for the stock market is a 20% pullback from high to low. And if we're looking at the weekly RSI, even though we're now playing out that oversold signal very nicely, technically we're still sitting below this center line, below this center area in the RSI, sitting in between around 45 to 55 in the weekly RSI. And usually during the bear markets, we find resistance in that area, and during the bull markets, we break out back above the area and find support in this area in the weekly RSI. And so at least for now, even though we're playing out that oversold signal very nicely in the short term as expected, obviously we've not yet seen a confirmed breakout back above this area in the RSI, which means technically speaking, there is still that possibility that perhaps we could play out a little bit more of a relief, but then in the coming weeks, we may end up seeing a rejection from that area in the RSI, kind of like what we saw here. And so just be aware of that. Of course, during these larger bearish trends, these bear markets, we can see decent rallies in the short term during the bear market. So just keep that in mind. We've not yet fully confirmed a reversal out of this entire situation right here. But once again, as I've already been saying for days now, expect at least a short-term relief. But it's also important to point out that, of course, there's one major difference between this bear market and the 2022 bear market, which is, of course, the fundamental cause for the bear market. And so as I've already explained in recent videos here on the channel, but I'll just mention it again in case you're new to this channel, basically one of the main causes for the 2022 bear market was the rise in inflation and the subsequent rise in interest rates. That really crashed markets, the rise in interest rates. And basically it takes much longer to actually bring inflation back down and obviously get through that entire cycle of inflation and interest rates. It can't just be turned around straight away. Whereas this time around, the fundamental cause for this bear market is, of course, the tariff policy out of the United States, and that can actually be flipped pretty much straight away with a simple decision from Donald Trump. And so just be aware of that fact. Obviously, we might not necessarily see the same length of a bear market like what we saw in 2022. Obviously, once again, this can potentially reverse much sooner if Donald Trump simply just drops tariffs. But anyway, that is the situation for the stock market. And if we're taking a look at the Bitcoin price charts today on the 4-day time frame, technically speaking, the super trend indicator is still sitting in the red on this time frame. So not much has changed over the last 1 day on this chart. And if we're taking a look at this weekly Bitcoin chart, technically the MACD is still looking more bearish than it is bullish. We're still a long way from potentially confirming a bullish crossover. But with that being said, we're not necessarily showing a massive amount of bearish momentum, at least in the short term. And so this is all perfectly playing out as I've been saying for weeks now on the channel. Once again, we played out that bearish crossover that we saw around the beginning of February, end of January, around there. And then we saw a lot of bearish momentum build up throughout February, as we could see. And then more recently, over the last few weeks, we've basically slowed down the bearish momentum. And in this time right here, over the last few weeks, I've been comparing the current stage in the market for the price of Bitcoin compared to what we saw back here around July to August 2024, for example. And so obviously at that stage right there, we had already played out most of the bearish momentum. We didn't necessarily see a significant amount of bearish momentum from that point onwards, but we still saw a little bit of short-term bearish price action here and there. And of course, it still took quite some time to ultimately flip much more bullish again, but we had already seen most of the bearish price action by that stage. But that's just going off the weekly Bitcoin MACD, and obviously so far it has been pretty much perfectly playing out as I've been talking about. But if we're taking a look at this weekly Bitcoin chart, obviously right now we still have a significant bearish divergence to pay attention to on the weekly time frame, telling us we should not necessarily expect a significant amount of bullish momentum here on the larger time frames, at least anytime soon. Of course, once again, we can see short-term bounces, short-term reliefs, but not necessarily a massive amount of momentum towards the upside like what we saw here, for example, or back here, for example. And so that is still the situation on these larger time frames. And just before taking a look at some other very important Bitcoin charts today, first, if you want to trade any of these moves in the price of Bitcoin or any other crypto, personally, I'm taking a lot of my crypto trades over on 2bit, so I'll make sure to leave a link to 2bit below this video in the description and in the pinned comment. And if you use that link, it'll take you to this page right here where you can claim some massive trading bonuses, like for example, up to $50,000 in trading rewards, simply just by using that link to trade crypto. And on top of that, if you're not one of these larger traders here, you can also claim a $30 sign up bonus using that link, and also a 20% deposit rebate up to a max of of 200 USDT. So for example, if you deposit $1,000, you get a $200 bonus. And on top of all of that, if you simply use the link below this video, you are automatically upgraded to VIP level 1 trading fees, which basically means you get a massive discount on trading fees. You get lowered trading fees over on 2bit, but remember, all of this right here is only available if you use that link. So if you're going to be trading crypto anyway, you might as well check this out. Once again, first link below this video. And in case you're wondering, 2bit is a no KYC exchange, which means you can access it from basically any country in the world without needing any KYC. But as always, check your local regulations when it comes to trading crypto. And for whatever reason, if you don't want 2bit as an exchange, there's also BTNex as another exchange that I also trade on. So I'll also make sure to leave a link to BTNex below this video as well. And if you use that link, it will take you to this sign up page where you can claim an exclusive 10% discount on all trading fees forever over on BTNex. That's a lifetime discount over on BTNex, but once again, only if you use that link. And also, in case you're wondering, BTNex is a no KYC exchange as well. But with that being said, taking a look at this Bitcoin price chart on the 3-day time frame, and right now we're continuing that almost perfect bounce from this area of support, sitting in between around 70,000 to 74,000. And obviously, I've been saying for weeks and months now on the channel, I've been talking about close to 74K as major support. I've been saying expect a lot of buyers, a lot of buying pressure coming to play at close to 74,000, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. The price came within just a couple $100 of 74,000 and started bouncing around there when all of the buying pressure kicked in at that level. And so as I talked about over the last couple of days here on the channel, very transparently, I have actually accumulated Bitcoin around this area, around 74 to 75K, which I talked about here on the channel over the last couple of days, once again, when the price was still down there, giving you that opportunity to accumulate some cheaper Bitcoin. And so right now, while the price of Bitcoin is bouncing from close to this support level right here, of course, we still have a lot of resistance to the upside that we need to pay attention to. So first of all, we have this significant area of resistance in between 86,000 to 88,000, especially at 88,000. That's acting as major resistance. And so it is possible that the price could be forming a bit of a sideways price range, consolidating sideways in between resistance and support levels right now. So just keep that in mind. I'd not necessarily flip massively bullish again on Bitcoin until we at very least see a breakout above 88,000 and ideally back above around 91 to 92K. Those will be the levels where I'd finally start expecting much more of a bullish reversal in Bitcoin, potentially coming up towards these highs again. But once again, only if we break out above some of these key levels. And if we're taking a look at this daily Bitcoin chart, obviously right now we're getting close to testing this descending line of resistance again, which is currently sitting at close to 84,000, at just above 84,000. And obviously we've seen many rejections from this line of resistance. So obviously that is an important line of resistance to pay attention to, once again at close to 84K. And if we're taking a look at this daily Bitcoin chart, right now the price is potentially already starting to play out this bullish divergence. Now, technically speaking, we still need to confirm this candle close to actually confirm this bounce in the RSI. But as of recording this video, this daily candle close confirms in a couple of hours from now, just a few hours from now. So obviously it is looking very likely we will confirm this strong bounce here in the daily Bitcoin RSI. And so at this point, it's pretty much safe to say that this bullish divergence is confirming, which means we're likely now going to see a continued relief, just a bit of a break from all of this bearish price action, at least in the somewhat shorter term. Because usually the most common outcomes from a bullish divergence, so not guaranteed, but the most likely outcomes from a bullish divergence are either a bullish relief in the shorter term or just a bit of choppy sideways price action is usually what we see from a bullish divergence. And usually a bullish divergence on the daily time frame tends to play out over a couple of weeks, give or take. Obviously, it can be shorter, it can be longer, so maybe just 1 week, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, but usually a couple of weeks is what we see from a bullish divergence on the daily time frame. And so I'll not be surprised if we end up seeing potentially a breakout at some point in the next few days or weeks above this descending line of resistance in the price of Bitcoin, and potentially another test of this area of resistance at 86 to 88,000 in the coming days or weeks. And if we're zooming further into the short term, taking a look at the 4-hour Bitcoin price chart, right now, as of recording this video, the price of Bitcoin is potentially now starting to play out a W pattern, also known as a double bottom pattern. And the technical price target for this price pattern right here, considering we've just broken out above the neckline, this point of resistance, which was at around $80,000, the technical price target for this double bottom pattern or W pattern is sitting at approximately 85,500, so just above 85k. So from the point of the breakout from roughly 80,000, obviously that's close to a 7% move, or from where we are as of recording this video to that price target, that's still around a 3 or 4% move towards the upside. And technically speaking, if we were to see a confirmed break back below around 80,000, that would invalidate this short-term price target and invalidate this price pattern. And if we're taking a look at the Bitcoin liquidation heat map, we also have a lot of liquidity building in the short term at close to 85,000. So as I've said many times here on the channel, usually, not always, but usually the price of Bitcoin tends to move towards where there's a lot of liquidity. So in other words, it's kind of like we have a magnet right now pulling the price towards around 85,000. And obviously, if the price gets closer towards 85,000, that would possibly mean a breakout above this descending line of resistance. But remember, we still have a lot of resistance in between around 86 to 88,000 that we cannot ignore. So that's what I'm expecting in the shorter term for Bitcoin, and of course the larger situation for Bitcoin and the stock market. And with that being said, taking a look at Ethereum on the weekly time frame, right now, technically speaking, the larger trend is simply still bearish for Ethereum. We've not yet confirmed any significant bullish trend reversal signals, but of course we are currently bouncing from significant support sitting in between around 1.4k to 1550. So roughly around that $1,500 level, we have a lot of support around there. And as I always say, Ethereum, along with a lot of the major altcoins out there, follow similar price action to what Bitcoin is doing. Obviously not the exact same price action, but if Bitcoin has a decent bounce in the short term, expect something similar for Ethereum and a lot of the altcoin market. And of course, if Bitcoin ultimately has another dump again, expect something similar for Ethereum. And so while I expect a bit of a relief in the short term for Bitcoin and the stock market, obviously we could likely see something in the shorter term for the price of ETH. But remember, that does not necessarily mean the larger bear market is completely over. But other than that, honestly, there's not much else to add here for Ethereum. So getting straight into the price of Solana on the weekly time frame. And right now, obviously, Solana is following Bitcoin and stocks with a short-term bounce coming in for another test of this previous area of support, which is now potentially flipping into new resistance, and that's sitting in between $120 to $130. And so I'll definitely be very careful about this area right here. Once again, it was very, very important support previously, and usually when we break below an important area of support, that usually flips into new resistance. So expect potentially a lot of resistance in between 120 to 130. And so in plain English, in case you're new to all of this, that means there is a high probability, not a guarantee, but a high chance that we could potentially reject from this area. But we do have some short-term good news for the price of Solana, which is, of course, this bullish divergence that I've talked about in recent videos here on the channel. But with this next daily candle close that will confirm in just a couple of hours from now, obviously, it's very likely that this will officially confirm with a decent bounce, actually cementing the higher low in place in the daily RSI for Solana. And so just like I said for Bitcoin earlier in the video, as always, a bullish divergence means we're most likely going to see either a slight bullish relief or just a bit of choppy sideways price action over the next couple of weeks, give or take, based on the bullish divergence on the daily time frame. But as always, we cannot ignore points of resistance where the price can still struggle. So just keep that in mind. We're playing out a bullish divergence, but we're running into major resistance. So it's possible, for example, we may end up seeing a little bit more of a bullish relief and then start struggling around this area, maybe causing a bit of choppy sideways price action like that as the price struggles around resistance, but also tries to play out the bullish divergence. And as always, expect similar price action for Solana as what we're seeing for Bitcoin. So once again, if Bitcoin plays out a bit of a relief, that will be at least some short-term good news for Solana and a lot of the altcoin market. And with that being said, if we're taking a look at the price of XRP on the 3-day time frame, technically speaking, on the larger time frames, we're still playing out this massive bearish divergence, as I've been saying for months now, since much higher prices. But in the shorter term, obviously, we are currently bouncing massively from this very important descending line of support, which is sitting at around $1.74 to $1.75. And obviously, over the last few days, we've seen multiple pretty much perfect bounces from that level of support based on these candle closes right here. And previously, we've seen many bounces from this line. So that is still acting as major support for the price of XRP, at least in the short term. And as for resistance right now, I'll be watching around $2.14 to $2.15 as a major point of resistance based on these highs right here, and also based on the center line for the descending parallel channel acting as resistance. And if we could finally see a breakout back above around 214 to 215 with candle closes confirming above that level, then in that situation, we'll likely see a relief potentially all the way up towards around 247 and possibly around 255 to 256 as another major point of resistance. And we also have a lot of resistance at this descending line of resistance right here, sitting at close to $2.60. And so obviously, if we're looking at the current trend, technically speaking, despite seeing the occasional short-term bounce from this level of support right here, technically speaking, the trend is still currently bearish. We've not yet fully confirmed a massive reversal out of this bearish trend, but at least in the short term, like I've said throughout this video, expect just a short-term relief for now. And if we're taking a look at the price of Chainlink on the daily time frame, just like a lot of the cryptos I'll be talking about throughout this video, Chainlink is also potentially now about to confirm this bullish divergence on the daily time frame and starting to play out a short-term bullish relief, but technically still within a larger bearish trend. And so in other words, I expect maybe something like this, for example, or something like this, for example, basically a break or a relief from the bearish trend, but not necessarily confirming a reversal out of the bearish trend. And when it comes to support and resistance to watch out for, we have a lot of support at around $10, which is pretty much exactly where the price of Chainlink bounced from. And obviously, I've been talking about that $10 level for many weeks now on the channel. In fact, for months now on the channel, I've been talking about these lower price levels. And as for resistance to watch out for, while we're playing out this bounce, this short-term bullish relief, we do have a lot of resistance at approximately 1270 to 1280, which we're currently running into as recording this video based on this previous Fibonacci level of support acting as new resistance. But if we can see a confirmed breakout with ideally a daily candle close confirming above around $12.80, and even better if we flip that into new support, in that situation we could possibly continue a relief all the way up towards roughly $15, and then around $14.90 to $15.50 we also have a lot of resistance around there. And so that's what I'm expecting in the short term for Chainlink, and of course the larger situation and the points of resistance and support that I'm watching. And as always, if you want to trade these moves in the price of any crypto, check out the links below this video to those exchanges if you want to claim those massive bonuses that are only available using those links. And if you want to actually know how you can trade any of these moves in the price of any crypto, no matter if they're bullish or bearish, then make sure to watch these videos popping up right here on your screen. The video in the top left shows you how you can profit from bullish or bearish price action using long positions or short positions, and the video in the bottom left shows you how you can easily profit from choppy sideways price action. But anyway, that is everything that I have to say for today. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video.